Joanna had received, even before I met her, that the project should be in a high mountain area. We saw an article, I believe it was in National Geographic, about the San Luis Valley. And Joanna got a strong feeling to explore further, and it turned out that the Manitou Foundation was donating land to spiritual organizations. And we were living in Washington State, and we were about less than 2 hours away from Hannah Strong, who was the person basically running the Manitou Foundation. Met with Hannah, and that was the beginning. That was probably the early 80s. And it took us almost 10 years before, we knew already this was where we were going to be coming, but we couldn't come here until it was practically, in a practical sense, correct for us to come. I needed to find a job. I was hired to be the principal and counselor at a local school here. I find that coming up with the musical part of songwriting, like the chord progression, that comes pretty easy to me, because I can just be sitting there without thinking a whole lot and just I keep a guitar by my bed. I play every day. I don't necessarily practice or learn new things. Sometimes I concentrate and focus on something, but usually I just pick up the guitar to make music. I keep a guitar by my bed, and I play almost every morning when I wake up, and I play almost every night before I go to bed. And a lot of times, if I happen to be home during the day and I walk into my bedroom, my guitar calls to me and says, "Pick me up and play me." And I might take 5 minutes in between a task that I'm doing and just dink around on the guitar. And coming up with musical progressions that can almost be songs, I find actually works without me thinking about it consciously. That's pretty easy. But when it comes time to writing the words, I have a much more difficult time doing that. It has to kind of come on its own. I'm not one of those songwriters who can sit down and I probably would benefit from doing this, but I don't sit down and have the discipline of writing every day and opening up that portal of my mind just through hard work, because basically I'm lazy. Now that you've gone, feeling closer all the time. Now that you've gone, seems you're often on my mind. Now that you've gone, wish you didn't have to go. I listened to my parents' records of Frank Sinatra and Judy Garland. And we had a little bit of Elvis in the house, and my sister kind of introduced me to folk music like Bob Dylan and Joan Baez, and Simon and Garfunkel in the early days. But when the Beatles hit, that was it for me. That was set me on the path of really wanting to learn how to play the guitar. I played the trumpet, but playing the guitar became kind of a major through line in my life from the time I was about 14. I never studied formally, but I'd say my first guitar influences, the people I listened to the most and I tried to learn from, were George Harrison of the Beatles, Steve Cropper, who was with Booker T and the MGs and was basically the guitarist on all the Stax records, like Otis Redding. I listened to a lot of Otis Redding, and Steve Cropper was his guitar player, and I loved the stuff he was doing. He has these those kind of sixths, they're called, and I use those to this day quite a bit, and I learned that from Steve. And I'd say Robin Ford has been someone I listen to the most. So as far as guitar influences goes, that I'd say those are. There's so many great guitar players that I love. I could talk for a long time about Ry Cooder and his slide playing, and Mike Campbell, who plays with Tom Petty. So there's so many great players that these days everyone influences me because there's so many fantastic players. And I got to go to San Francisco. Was only like 40 minutes away, and I did get a chance to see Jerry Garcia and the Grateful Dead quite a bit. The one thing the Grateful Dead that some people do not like, but I happen to love, is improvisation. That's really what they were about. I mean, they would improvise and go places that they didn't plan, but they would listen to each other musically, and sometimes it didn't work, but a lot of times it did, and it was a great musical journey. And I had that experience many times, and that has influenced me a lot, because when I play guitar in a band, in a couple of the bands I play in now, when I get a chance to, and it doesn't happen every song, because we usually play songs that have a pretty good structure, but there are some songs where we do get to improvise, and that whole improvisational thing is something that started really at that time in the late 60s.
My very first band was Heavenly Days Quartet. We formed in spring of 1971 in Palo Alto, California, and played throughout the Bay Area. Inner Voices was a Subud band that played a lot of original songs. We formed in the early 80s in Bellingham, Washington, and we got to play at the 1982 Subud World Congress at Anugraha in England. Midlife Crisis was a band that I helped form in 1988 in Skagit Valley, Washington, and they're still playing today. Earthmen was a band that started in 1997 in southern Colorado, and we played throughout Colorado for the next 7 years. 2 Weeks in Fiji was a great rock and roll cover band and bar band. We started in 2005, played throughout Colorado, and occasionally we still get together to do gigs. The Jock Kings are a great reggae band that I played on and off with for a couple of years and learned a lot about reggae. I play in two bands, Blue Rooster and Waverly Road, and some of the same members are in each band, so sometimes we combine and play as one band.
Check.
Stephen will come on out and make a big deal about us.
Welcome everyone to Wildwood Sounds. These guys are playing just to benefit us so we can keep the venue going. Welcome, Waverly Rooster.
Yeah.
Chain, chain, chain. Chain, chain, chain. Chain, chain, chain. Chain of food. For 5 long years, for I was your man. I found out I'm just a link in your chain. You got me where you want me. I ain't nothing but your fool. You treated me mean. You treated me cruel.
Like, as a guitar player, I wanted to learn as many styles and genres as I was capable of doing so. I played with people who were more into blues, so I learned a lot about blues by playing with them. There was a Subud sister in Marin, Hosanna Treffs. Then she became Hosanna Bauer. She was a great gospel blues singer, still is. And she had been playing with a guy named Dennis Hogan. And we started with Raphael and Halima Christie. We started something called the Hogan Treffs Blues Band. And we didn't last all that long, but man, we had a good time. We got to play in San Quentin Prison.
which was one of the musical highlights that I'll never forget.
There have been other bands that I've been in over the years that were short-lived but a lot of fun, with names like Silver Lining Band or Doodah Boulevard, and probably a few more that I can't remember the names of.
I was in college in the late 60s, early 70s, and like a lot of people at that time, I was believed that it was possible to, get out of the drudgery of daily reality into something like a higher level. And it was actually through that I discovered Subud and Alaya and Halima Van Tile. They had told me about this experience called psychodrama. During a quiet time, in between some, psychodrama role-playing, being quiet, Hussein started talking about God. And when he was talking, I had this, almost like a light bulb go off, that I never really considered, that maybe God existed, that God was in my life, and that I felt grateful for the experiences of my youth, which I had really taken for granted, not really thought much about. That long after that I went to visit my friends Alaya and Halima. We talked a little bit about Subud, and that's when the first time I sat outside Ladihan. I was eventually opened in Palo Alto, where I was living. And of course my life has been blessed. I have a wonderful family, and somehow I've made it this far. I've been able to pay my bills and play music and have a lot of love in my life. So